All right, terrific. Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your participation. I'd like to start by wishing a special thank you to all of the members who participated in our recent call for white papers and our call for documentation for Canada's DRI needs assessment. We received 110 white papers, which are now housed on our website for all of you to be able to review. And we received 23 current documents, of which all will contribute significantly as we identify and address DRI and service requirements for the future. A lot of progress has taken place for NDRIO since members met virtually on September 24th at our AGM. I look forward to sharing with you an update today, along with a recap of next steps. Importantly, I look forward to hearing from you for your feedback and your questions. We're going to kick off our meeting today with a video featuring the Honourable William Amos, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. I will then provide an update on NDRIO activities and our next steps. Suzanne Talon, CEO of Calco Quebec and Associate Member of NDRIO, will then say a few words about how Calco Quebec is collaborating with NDRIO and how other ecosystem partners can do the same. We've left a lot of time for questions and feedback from our members. During the feedback session, you can submit questions using the chat function. You are also welcome to share feedback or ask your question out loud by raising your hand. To raise your hand, click the participants at the bottom of your screen and select the Raise My Hand feature, which will then, when you click, remember to please bring your hand down. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. However, if we cannot get to all of your questions, or if you have questions after today's meeting, you can contact us at any time at the email address at the end of this presentation. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared on our website for those members who are unable to participate today. Now, before we continue with the Parliamentary Secretary's remarks, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Before doing so, if we can remind everyone to please mute themselves as they enter the meeting. As we meet virtually this afternoon across the country, I would like to acknowledge that we are all located on different unceded traditional territories of different nations. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought each of us to reside on these lands and to seek to understand our place within that history. I myself am based in Toronto, and I acknowledge that I am on traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Others in Ottawa are located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, whereas those of you in Montreal are situated on the traditional territory of the Kenyan-Kahaka. As we move on to the proceedings of our meeting, I would like to extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We'd now like to play for you a video from the Honourable William Amos, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
I would like to start by welcoming your new CEO, Nizar Ladak. Your experience, Nizar, and your knowledge of the DRI ecosystem in Canada will certainly contribute to NDRIO's effectiveness as the organization is implementing its early activities to ensure that academic researchers in Canada continue to have access to the digital tools necessary to support their really, really important research. I also want to congratulate the NDRIO's team for all the work they've accomplished so far, including and particularly the early transition work with Canary and consultation planning for activities in the new year with the DRI community. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Canadians have rallied together, they've come together, they've made sacrifices, and they've done their part to help limit the spread of the virus. We've all done this. And this uncertainty, which is so unprecedented around COVID-19, has impacted NDRIO and the entire DRI community, in addition to the rapid changes within the community itself. I have been heartened to see Canadian researchers and the DRI community come together to support the national response to COVID-19. Canada's research community has demonstrated its incredible agility in its efforts to understand COVID-19, its impacts, and Canada has been a global leader when it comes to the response to the pandemic, and NDRIO is part of that. NDRI's progress over the last year has been significant, and we know that the pandemic and the resulting refocusing within the research community has impacted NDRIO's ability to deliver on its mandate and to engage the research community on key aspects of the strategic visioning and planning. Our researchers are depending on you guys to make progress to define a national DRI vision that's responsive and reflects their needs. And I'd like to recognize all the NDRIO has done, all it has accomplished in less than a year, from building an organization by incorporating in March 2020, electing a diverse and committed inaugural board, selecting your CEO, Mr. Ledak, to working with the community on the initial steps of a needs assessment, and then strategic planning with major partners on transition activities. NDRIO is taking the steps needed to bring its vision for DRI into life. I was particularly pleased to learn about your major milestone in the selection of your Researcher Council earlier this fall. Their work and participation within NDRIO will ensure that strategic directions of the NDRIO are research-centric, diverse, and responsive to researcher needs, and that's just really crucial. The Researcher Council is a vital way to provide representation for researchers from disciplines all across Canada and to ensure that researchers' voices are a key part of NDRIO's vision by acting as a neutral and expert body to look at important questions facing Canadian researchers. Now more than ever, we need diverse voices to guide our decision-making processes. Giving a voice to researchers from all disciplines through the Researchers Council is one way that the DRI strategy will ensure that it's reflective of researchers and their unique and particular needs. I was also pleased to learn of the NDRIO's commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including your commitment to appoint 50% female directors to your board. Bravo. And I would encourage you to take it a step further. I would encourage you to publicly commit to the 50-30 challenge that was just announced recently by Minister Baines. The 50-30 challenge is a bottom-up, co-created and nationally recognized initiative where participating organizations agree to voluntarily take action towards achieving meaningful and substantive improvements in supporting diversity and inclusion within their organization. The challenge is rooted in two particular aspirations: gender parity, 50% on the board and senior management, and secondly, significant representation, 30%, on the board and senior management of other underrepresented groups, including racialized persons, people living with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2 community. A diverse and inclusive organization with a wide variety of representation from top to bottom will ensure that strategic decisions will be made in the interests of Canada's entire research community, the research community as a whole. And this is going to strongly benefit the entire DRI ecosystem, which ultimately will benefit Canadians and serve the public interest. The challenges of the past few months have made it really clear that the implementation of the DRI strategy requires dedication to bold and ambitious transformation. NDRIO's efforts to date in advancing progress towards this goal, despite the setbacks of COVID-19, should be applauded, and I do applaud you. NDRIO has a significant role in defining and implementing a national vision for infrastructure and services related to advanced research computing, data management, research software, and this includes the need to work closely with the key players in the DRI ecosystem to keep all of the channels of communication open, to ensure a smooth and effective transition for the research community and its highly qualified personnel, of course. For the Government of Canada, Investments in cybersecurity are also a big priority. We've seen the reality of this priority heightened over the past 12 months with security agencies and the ministers of innovation, health, public safety issuing unprecedented public warnings about the threat or threats rather to Canadian COVID 19 pandemic related research and innovation, including threats to Canadian research integrity, intellectual property, and business interests. So, this is obviously a big issue. Of course, the DRI ecosystem plays a key role in protecting the integrity of Canadian research and must enable secure services and infrastructure so that Canadians can benefit from our significant investments in science. This year has held many unforeseen challenges, yet NDRIO has succeeded in making progress towards implementing the goals of the DRI strategy. So please be assured that you have ISED's full support in defining and implementing a renewed national vision for DRI infrastructure and services. Again, I want to congratulate you all. Congratulations for the work the NDRIO has accomplished until today. It's impressive, and it's paving the way for a promising future for the Canadian research community. So thanks again. Appreciate the opportunity. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Be healthy. Be safe.
Thank you, Parliamentary Secretary. So with that, Madeline's going to share a screen, and I'll be happy to provide you now with an update on NDRIO's activities. So what I'm hoping to cover with all of you today is a little bit about the strategic plan, my 90-day listening tour that's been conducted from across the country, some transition planning, and a little bit about our Q&A, or a lot of time, sorry, for our Q&A. In terms of my listening tour, I started on October the 5th, and I've had the pleasure now to meet with well over 200 individuals from across the country, where I've been asking two questions: what's working well and what could be better? And I've been enormously gratified by the openness and the willingness to share in your DRI ecosystem as we try to improve for the researchers of Canada. I've also been invited to a number of speaking engagements, which now cumulatively total well over 500 individuals. And I share these statistics not to brag or to boast, instead to share with you an overwhelming commitment to the improvement of our ecosystem and to be able to deliver one that serves the needs of researchers from across this country. Since our first AGM, or since the AGM on September 24th, 2020, where I was introduced to all of you, we've also had a little bit of an evaluation where we asked members things around how we should be constructing our engagement and communication activities with all of you. We found from the survey responses that many of you indicated the information to be informative and the quality of the submission, simultaneous translation as key factors in their enjoyment of these updates. For our next AGM, we've also heard a little bit about the platform we used last time, and we're hoping to simplify it, trying sessions such as today to be able to allow you to ask questions, whether in writing or verbally. And so I want to thank all of you for your continued commitment to our overall participation and feedback. In the coming months, we're also going to be developing a membership plan by April 2021. We have a board subcommittee called the Stakeholder and Member Relations Committee, which is chaired by the vice chair of our board. We have a number of our board members also represented. And over the coming months, we will be looking at other research-based organizations and learning from them, borrowing any best practices that we can apply to NDRIO. We'll be further consulting and involving you, all of our members, whether primary or affiliate, to provide us with feedback on what would be a value proposition in terms of your continued membership within our organization. We're going to be assessing similarities and differences and overall looking at options around member fees, which we've also received some feedback on. So stay tuned over the coming months as we do that. Over the course of my 90-day stakeholder engagement plans and my listening tour, I've had the privilege to meet with so many individuals who have taken the time to share their perspectives. And this is just a small sample. This is not the exhaustive list, but just a small sample, almost chronologically ordered in terms of the number of individuals that I've had the pleasure to chat with and listen to. The approach that we're taking overall is a traditional approach where we're looking at stakeholder influence on the organization. Whoops, let me go backwards to that one. That jumped over. Thanks, Madeline. The approach we're taking is one of a traditional one where we're looking at both the level of influence and the required articulation of engagement opportunities with our organization. So many of you would have seen something like this where we try to map all of our different stakeholders and work with our board subcommittee and based on feedback from all of you as to the level of engagement that all of you should look toward or wish to have. And I think that's the key point that I want to emphasize. This is not us deciding. This is based on your expressions as part of the consultations and other activities, what level of engagement you wish to have. Some of you want principal engagement where you'd like to be on committees, where you'd like to have key input into the variety of mechanisms that we're rolling out in the coming months, whereas others have said, you know what, an update every quarter through your video conferences or other things is pretty much what we'd like to have. And so based on your articulated needs, we're hoping to capture all of that within this framework that we're using as guidance, as opposed to a clear stipulation of the level of engagement, and then discussing it with our board's subcommittee as we think about value proposition for our members. In terms of the next slide, the level of the kinds of consultations that we have envisioned, so more to forecast for all of you over the course of 2021. We will be doing our needs assessment, which will have town halls that I'll speak about. We're going to be engaging all of you on our national service delivery and funding model creation. We'll be engaging all of you in the creation of our mission, vision, and values, along with our strategic plan, as well as some of the feedback we've had around how to create a value proposition for the members at their various levels. As well, we'll be having brand development. So Endrio is not going to be our long-time name. We are going to be embarking after the strategic plan or in parallel to the strategic plan, an opportunity for you to name your new DRI organization. And so this was always meant by my dear colleagues who were my predecessors, Gail and Lori, who said that we had created this as a temporary name, the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization. And so there will be plans to look at a name and an image that clearly represents the organization that we all wish to aspire toward. I want to also signal for you that I've begun a monthly blog. This is an opportunity for me to share with you the outcomes of my listening tour, but also throughout the course of the year, issues and challenges and opportunities that start to arise as part of our conversations. So my first blog, my inaugural blog, is on the website, and you're welcome to please review it, and I'm happy to take any feedback. And in the coming months, we already have plans for a monthly one beginning in January 2021. So now I want to spend some time on our strategic planning process and our foundations that we hope to establish as we go forward. Many of you have seen this slide, and quite frankly, I'm very pleased that many of you have seen this slide, because that means we're getting our message out there. But for the benefit of those who haven't seen this, the way to orient yourself to this slide is to think about from left to right our foundational beginnings and our movement forward. So I want to give full attribution and credit to Cuccio, when the CIOs from all of the universities participated in efforts, along with the Leadership Council for Digital Research Infrastructure, who submitted a series of papers to ICED, which resulted in $572 million in funding. A portion of that went to Canary, a portion of that went to our national host sites in the advanced research computing arena, and $350 million was reserved for Endrio to facilitate our activities. And so we began what we're calling our needs assessment. And the way to think about our needs assessment is largely comprised of three principal components. As I shared at the beginning, we did a call for white papers and received well over 100. And we committed to sharing all of these on the website. And so you can begin to see how your colleagues and your partners from across the country have contributed information to our thinking and our planning. Really, what we said to them is don't create anything from scratch, or sorry, don't think about it as a hardcore data analytics exercise. Instead, two or three quick pages that summarize for us what should be on our planning radar screen as we think about going forward. What are some particular issues that you'd like to share with us? From that, we've done our call for documentation, and we've started to receive many of those. And this is in almost direct contrast to the needs to the call for the white papers, where we're saying if you have existing documents, don't create anything from scratch. These could be your annual reports. These could be your own strategic plans. This could be any number of pieces of material that's already available that you're willing to share with us, so that we can review and factor that into our planning activities. We've also begun a needs assessment survey, which has benefited from over 50 individuals who've had input into it. We've thought of a number of different avenues, from what kind of information we wish to ask of our constituents from across the country, as well as other elements. We're trying to maximize our communication activities. And so I've worked closely with each of the CEOs of the regions, the ARC regions. I've worked with Portage, I've worked with Research Data Canada, and thinking about the kinds of questions that we should be asking. And we had, as I said, 50 reviewers who went through it, thought about things like equity, diversity, inclusive language that we wish to incorporate. We also took this opportunity to create geographically specific elements. So as we embark upon the release of this needs assessment survey, we'll be able to create microdata files that we'll share with the regions and be able to allow them to delve more deeply into the responses that we're getting back from our researchers. We've done a current state assessment for research data management. It's now benefiting from the input of our researcher council as they're looking in and providing feedback. And I'd like to acknowledge all of the different individuals who had their role in producing that. We're currently in the role of creating a current state assessment for advanced research computing, where again, we have a work group, and then we'll benefit from the expertise and advice of our researcher council. And then we'll be proceeding in the early new year towards a current state assessment for research software. The thing that all of these elements have in common is the fact that we'll be conducting town halls. We'll be doing them across the country, respecting time zones in both official languages. Every one of these products have benefited from the involvement of working groups, and we'll be sharing much of this material on our website, whether in raw form like the white papers or in a synthesized manner, so you can see the gist of the overall input. Within a week, we're going to be releasing a large RFP. And the large RFP is going to produce three components by the successful firm that's selected to help us do so. We're going to be asking them to do an environmental scan, a global environmental scan. So we'll naturally compare ourselves to the jurisdictions we often do: Australia, the United Kingdom, France, the United States. But we're also asking them to look at jurisdictions that might have specific elements or things that we could benefit from. In my conversations, as an example, with the former CIO of Canada, Alex Benet, Alex, if you've ever heard him speak, always talks about Estonia and how there are tremendous practices that we could benefit from. So we'll be asking the successful proponent to go out to jurisdictions like this. My colleague Guylaine Roquet recently attended a session with the University of San Diego, which talked about cloud computing as a potential complement to advanced research computing. And there are many other jurisdictions in research software and research data management that we could benefit from. My colleague Jeff Moon is on the call today, and others who would be able to share with you that we could learn a lot from our global jurisdictions. We're going to talk to you about technological advancements, and we're going to be asking the successful proponent to be able to share with us, are there particular technologies on the horizon or currently being used that could fundamentally shift how we're thinking about moving forward? So the common examples would be artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, but we're also hearing from vendors that there are substantial advancements being made in the area of chips and hardware that could fundamentally shift how we're thinking. And I think the last component that many of you will be interested to learn about is looking at the national funding models as we introduce or strive to introduce predictability and stability and get off that roller coaster ride of funding that we try to stretch out for a 5, 7 year period and then look for a new injection of funding. How do we introduce some predictability, both for our staffing and to be able to retain the highly qualified personnel that are, quite frankly, the treasure of Canada and that factor most prominently in our plans going forward? How do we ensure that the organizations across this country that are employing them and that are supporting our researchers have a predictable way of being able to not only nurture, retain, and grow these individuals as we move forward? And then yet again, the purpose of the brace brackets in this diagram is we will go back to the community. We'll be asking you, did we get it right? Are there nuances that we've perhaps missed? Are there pieces of information that we didn't follow through on? Are the things that we ought to know as we look at these three particular components? We'll be sharing this information on our websites, and all of these will engage both town halls in both official languages at different time zones. The one I'd like to spend a little bit of time now on is our inaugural projects, which will happen in tandem. We have plans in January, February to do an inaugural call for projects where between 15 and $20 million will be available to help us with a series of projects. One of the principal criteria that we have for these projects is that they capture research data management, research software, and advanced computing. And if those projects involve some sort of a pilot study or a proof of concept, that they should have the capability to scale nationally as we think about our initial activities. We're also saying things like that will help contribute to and build culture across our country, culture in our DRI ecosystem. So we're saying things like, well, it's not a requirement. If the proposals have interprovincial collaboration, interministerial collaboration, are inviting our federal partners to the table and our provincial partners, you will score more favorably. If it's a proposal that includes institutions from across regions and across provinces, you will score more favorably. I've been incredibly encouraged by the kinds of ideas that have started to come forward. And of course, we haven't made up our minds about the projects. We're going to go through that. But I thought I would share for you some of the remarkable ideas that have already started to percolate. But more importantly, I do that because I want to encourage you. If you had similar ideas, please reach out to your ARC regions, to your colleagues at Portage, at Research Data Canada, and find out how you can become engaged and help elevate and move forward many of these kinds of projects. The most obvious example is people have said it's long overdue that we have a cloud computing strategy, as we have struggled over the last number of years to try to crack that percentage count where only about 40% of researchers have been able to get the services and cycles that they require. Could we be looking at cloud computing as a complement to on-premises solutions through our national data centers? Can we look at cloud computing for things like burst capacity, where around grant time, the overwhelming access and demand for access to cycles, spikes? And so could cloud potentially do that? Could we use Endrio's leverage in terms of procuring some sort of a spot price that we could then make available to researchers across the country? Another idea is one that has, I think, resonance with many of the people in this community. And people have said it is also long overdue that we have a Canadian national health data management strategy. COVID didn't recognize boundaries. And so it's very difficult for us as we tried to navigate through the crisis of the last several months to have situations where provinces that neighbored each other, Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, BC, who couldn't share information about their citizens as it corresponded to their health, in order to help navigate through one of the largest pandemics in our lifetimes. And so it's long overdue. Organizations like CIHI, Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, many of them have come forward and says, we would love to be able to help move forward a national strategy on health data management. The third one is one that I want to give full credit to my colleague, Malcolm Campbell at the University of Guelph, where a number of months ago when we chatted, we talked about digital agriculture. And I had the sincere pleasure to hear about the fact that we have collaborations with other countries within country, with the University of Saskatchewan and others, where we're looking at things like the future of food or food for thought, and where we've developed data models that allow us to store and house genetic sequencing information of many of Canada's natural resources. Right now, the angle that I think particularly caught my attention as we started to think about these is that in working with Agriculture Canada or others, many infectious disease specialists have said to us, it's not a question of when, or it's not a question of if, it's a question of when the next pandemic's going to occur. And based on our analysis needs are, it's probably going to be a foodborne illness, another mad cow disease, for example. Well, Canada, based on its collaborations that have been spearheaded by these universities, have the potential to be able to, in the event of another mad cow disease, tell you down to the individual steer where that infection arose. What a remarkable capability our partners in research have been able to create. And then the last one I'll spend a little bit of time on is almost a bit of an ironic one. I read an article recently in Computer World which talked about the fact that data centers globally now have a larger carbon footprint than the aviation industry. By 2025, just a short 4 or 5 years from now, the data center carbon emissions will exceed the nuclear generation and aviation industries in terms of their carbon emissions. And yet I've seen wonderful examples at the University of Laval, at examples in University of Waterloo and elsewhere, where they're looking at cooling methods and ways to sort of repackage some of their carbon footprint. At Laval, for example, they're actually pumping out the heat to be able to heat swimming pools on campus, cafeterias, and other innovative models such as that. So I think we would love to see some sort of an environmental plan. Equipped with all of that, that's when we will do our strategic plan. If we are encouraged by the recent dissemination of vaccines, I'm sincerely hoping we will all gather in Ottawa in the summer, obviously provided health variables allow us to do so, to spend a few days together with our board, interacting with one another, and begin to plan the strategic objectives and goals for our NDRIO organization. Underlying all of that, of course, will be the guiding principles that we've committed to as we think about our mission, vision, and values over that period of time. Now, in parallel, what we're also trying to do is build an organization. And so we're looking at, sorry, I'm just trying to advance this slide. Um, there we go. We're working with the advanced computing regions located on the left-hand side from WestGrid, Compute Ontario, Calco Quebec, and AceNet to think about transition. And we're working with RDC and Portage as we try to build the NDRIO organization. The reason for the two double-sided arrows is that we're also looking at the many products that are coming through from the white papers to the national service delivery model to influence the shape of our and the nature of our organization. And so now I'm going to turn to the next slide to share a little bit with you about the draft organizational structure that we've created and that we've recently gone through a competitive RFP process. Madeline, could you advance? It's not working for me. Thank you. We recently went through a competitive RFP process where we've awarded Odgers Bernston to help us in recruiting for the first layer of individuals that you see on this draft organizational structure. I had the pleasure to hold my first board meeting on December 8th, where I shared this with our Human Resources Committee and with the full board to give input into the construction. Now, before I start to explain from left to right, I want to make one point very clear. The third vice president, operations and security, this does not reflect the individuals from the Compute Canada Federation or from Portage that we're currently transitioning with. And so in many ways, some of these roles that you see on this structure, why it's listed as draft, is they're considered placeholders. There's some that I think we can definitively move forward on, but many of the others, I think we also want to allow the senior management individuals that we will be recruiting to help shape their individual portfolios. So moving from left to right, no organization can function effectively without a strong vice president of corporate services. This is an individual which will have financial acumen, human resources acumen, and elements of IT as they think about our activities. But the part that may be different on our organizational chart is the fact that we also hope to have a director of procurement and grant management. This will be an individual to oversee the distribution of funds as we continue to absorb our roles, as we look to the conclusion of CFI's role in terms of the MSI in 2022, and how we think about the service obligations and contractual obligations that we hope to have leadership on as we work with the research community in fulfilling their needs. We'll have a vice president of strategy and planning. This will be very much the growth arm of the organization, where this individual will be responsible for not only overseeing much of the transition activities, but thinking about how to continue to improve. Once we transition, it doesn't mean we go into status quo. We will consistently, as a learning organization, be looking to try to figure out how we do better. And so many of the roles you see under that, whether it's the director of strategic initiatives and our lead for the researcher council and others, will be working with our researcher councils to think about new initiatives, new opportunities as we go forward, along with new technologies and other activities. I want to point you to the last role in that particular chart, which is a director of international relations and industry engagement. We've had some tremendous activity based on our predecessor organizations where Canada's actually taken a leadership role in the area of standards development in technology, and we're participating in global forums. And so we very much want to move forward and continue to propel our organization, but more our country onto the global stage of knowledge environment, knowledge economy. The third role, the Vice President Operations and Security, think of that one as more the day-to-day oversight role, where as we start to transition activities, whether it's the support of our data centers, whether it's the work of our research data management in Portage, and many others, those will be the activities that this individual will provide leadership to. And so that's why I wanted to make it very clear that this does not reflect the transition activities that we're currently involved with our colleagues at Portage or with Research Data Canada or with Compute Canada Federation. Those individuals will fall under this third portfolio. And then finally, our Vice President, Communications and External Relations. We want to do well by you as our members. We want to look at the initiatives around value proposition for your membership, but also create clear and consistent communication mechanisms. In fact, at the end of this presentation, we'll be doing a poll for all of you on the frequency of our communications with you and the nature of those particular communications. So as you see from that footnote, which we'll be putting this chart on our website for all of you to see, it's not meant to reflect the spectrum of relationships that I'll also personally be supporting through my office with our ARC regional organizations, with the universities, with the U15, Universities Canada, and other organizations who are vital partners in the success of our work. So with that, I'll turn to the next slide. Thanks, Madeline. I want to share with you a quick update on our Researcher Council progress. They've now met 3 times over the course of the last few months. And I hope all of you will appreciate, as a startup organization, we don't have this master plan that we're going to be rolling out. In many ways, we are learning as we go along. And so I say that because I will, for one, as the Chief Executive Officer, will acknowledge we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. We're not going to do things perfectly right from the get-go. And I ask for your patience and indulgence as we do that. But the other commitment I can make to you is that we will try very hard not to repeat those mistakes. Because if we repeat them, then that means we didn't learn from them. So expect us to misstep, expect us to not do everything perfectly from the get-go, but also expect that we are committed to trying to make our organization representative of your needs and your interests as we embark on the variety of different planning activities. We're also dealing with a number of what I would call almost conflicting objectives. So many of my dear colleagues have said, Nizar, go quickly, move fast. Others have said, Nizar, slow down. You only get one chance to make this right. It's so much more harder undoing things that you commit to. And so we're, of course, trying to strike the balance. We have our own contribution agreements. We have expectations from our funders, and we have the needs of the researchers that we're trying to serve, but we're trying to do so thoughtfully and systematically. And so what all of this has to do with the Researcher Council is the fact that we're seeking their advice, their constructive advice. They're the ones who are telling us, you didn't do this right. You need to think differently. Did you consider things like equity, diversity, and inclusion in your decisions? How are we going to be engaged in rolling out the needs assessment? We understand you want to move quickly, but don't move so quickly that we don't get it right from the get-go and that we miss the opportunity. So do know that we are trying to work through our mechanisms to be as responsive to this governance body that we are elevating within our organization. Next slide, Madeline. And so a little bit of detail on the needs assessment. The way to think about it is the call for the white papers, the current documentation, and the survey are going to result in some preliminary findings that through the validation phase, we are going to take out to our town halls. So we've not finalized these things and then shared with them, with all of you to say, here's what we found. Instead, this is the opportunity through the validation phase to say, did we get it right? Are there nuanced, elements that we're missing? And so the last box around community comments, you will have the opportunity in writing and in other mechanisms to be able to review the white papers and say, this is a very interesting paper, but perhaps you would want to think about this factor or that factor. Next slide, Madeline. And so this, I'm just conscious of time. This is basically the timelines that we're working toward and the ways in which we're hoping to engage our researcher council and the public input opportunities through the various dates and times. Next slide. And by the way, this is all going to be recorded and shared on our website. So as a result of hearing the advice from our colleagues and our researcher council and others, there have been some public commitments to all of you around when we're hoping to deliver many products. And of course, as a result of my arrival and as a result of your feedback to say, get it right, take your time, do it thoughtfully, some of these have shifted. So I'm going to try to do the animation where, yeah, I think that worked. So some of these have started to shift. Where we had plans originally to do a strategic plan in the fall, that's been shifted to the summer. Things like our operational transition plan with Compute Canada has also shifted a little bit. And all of that has happened in order to make room for the variety of different pre-activities and consultation opportunities that have been introduced through this process. This is a listing of the key dates and timelines, and again, will be available on our website. And now I want to talk to you a little bit about transition planning. We have begun to actually construct paper documents and other things that will look at the transition for our colleagues at Portage and in Research Data Canada with Canary. And the planning deadline is around January 2021, so that it all culminates in terms of an overall transition plan for advanced research computing activities and these other areas by the early spring of 2021. And we have also created a joint committee with Compute Canada Federation in terms of overseeing that so that it happens in a seamless manner for our researchers. And that more importantly, as a result of these particular shifts, we're not losing our valuable HQP, because that to me would be a real loss for our organization. They are truly at the center of everything that we think about, along with, of course, our principal audience, our researchers of Canada. So as we start to think about these things, I want to share this last example and then wind up, is we've started to think about things like funding. And as a result of my listening tour, we've heard a number of different suggestions. And this is just to give you an illustrative example of how particular factors are working in our minds. We looked at the Federal Granting Council Awards by province over the last number of years. We haven't got 2020, but we'll be updating this with the last 5-year look. And we broke them down by advanced research computing regions. And typically what we found was that whether you look at Atlantic Canada, you see anywhere between 3 and 6.5% of the percentage of Federal Granting Council awards over the period listed on this slide. And for Quebec, it ranges between 28 to 30%, Ontario 40 to 44%, and in the West Grid communities between 28 and 30%. We also looked at similar statistics for the Canada Foundation for Awards. And similarly, those statistics almost remarkably were consistent in terms of their breakdown by ARC regions. We even looked at the awards by Canada Research Chairs. And again, the statistics were remarkably consistent. And so we plotted them out on this next slide where you can see the range of percentage awards based on that. So people said, look, this has been maintained for almost 10 to 15 years. Why not just divvy out the funds that are available to support advanced research computing using these particular ranges? Well, it was our researcher council and many of the others who have raised for us. If you do that, you reinforce the status quo. There isn't an opportunity for these smaller rural universities to begin to gain access. How do we even begin to penetrate through the communities that have been underserved? How do we start to address questions for Indigenous researchers or the social sciences and the humanities? We keep saying that they're the up and coming areas, but if we reinforce these statistics, how are we certain that we're going to be able to reach these particular audiences? So many of you would have seen this slide on the internet or through, social media channels. And this is what we're also thinking about, is that from equality, how do we strive towards equity? We don't have the answers, but do know this is something that we're trying to do as part of our activities. It's not going to be done from the get-go, but it is what we aspire to be able to achieve. So as we look at all of the activities that we're inheriting, we're asking ourselves questions like, are there better ways to do things? Are we being responsible with the public funds that are entrusted to us? I mentioned at the outset, $350 million has been given. This is your taxpayer dollars. And so we want to be enormously respectful and responsible for the use of these particular funds. And how is our approach better than what's being done today? That's another thing that we constantly are asking ourselves. So, as I've spent the last several months thinking about our organization and what we hope to accomplish, I want to leave you with one thought, and that's the technology is going to happen in many ways, but the organizational culture and the ecosystem culture that we need to create is one that I need to stand alongside all of you in helping to create around our ecosystem. What I've seen today is a situation where we have division, where we have those with data centers, those who have access to research data management frameworks and other things. And we also have a level of segregation where federal, provincial boundaries and other things, where we think about those researchers with access, those without. And in some ways, we actually have a lot of competition. Now, I want to be careful here, and I want to share with you that I don't think competition is bad. And in fact, we are going to embrace competitive efforts as part of the inaugural call for the projects that I mentioned it earlier. But I think we can also perhaps offset some of the misaligned incentives that have existed in our ecosystem where, BC will compete with Ontario or Quebec will compete with Atlantic Canada in infrastructure competitions. And then we turn around and ask them, please share your best practices, only to hear, well, why would I do that? It was that best practice or that niche practice that was actually the reason I was successful in being able to get the funds that we needed to. And so, as we start to think about ways to improve this, colleagues, I want to start to introduce new nouns as part of or our cultural change over the course of our DRI ecosystem. I want to move from nouns like division, and I want to move to nouns like um, unity. And from segregation, I want to move to nouns like integration. And from competition, I want to move to nouns like collaboration as we aspire to think about the culture we wish to introduce across our ecosystem. So at this stage, I'm going to pause and Madeline and Cynthia, if I'm correct, I'm going to give the opportunity to Suzanne to share her thoughts around collaboration with our organization.
Hi, Nizar. Thanks. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's very nice that you were finishing with this vision of unity, integration, and collaboration, because that was actually my starting point. Uh, so my goal here today is to share a little bit of my vision of how the future can evolve. And I think I need to put on a timer if I want to make sure I don't talk too much. And see how we can each have a role to play. So the first thing I'd like to say is that Embryo is not outside of us. Embryo is there for the community, and it's there working with the community. And the community here being the regional ARC organization, Computer Ontario, Calcul Québec, AceNet, WestGrid, but also the data management community, Portage, RDC, the software community. That was never something that was structured in a national way, but there's several software teams all over the place working on their own little projects. There were teams, platforms funded through Canary in the past, and Embryo is the sum of all of these communities working together, and hopefully the sum is going to be greater than just adding all people together, right? We want to create some synergies here by working together. And so what I thought I'd do today is kind of share a little bit of what are, I think, are the key elements in building this new organization that we're all part of. And the first thing that's very important is building trust between partners, right? And that's not going to be done overnight. That takes time. And just as an example, in the case of Calcul Quebec, many of you maybe remember that 12 years ago, there were two different organizations, RQCHP and CLUMEC, not in competition, but not necessarily working together, right? And, you know, one step at a time, we started doing things like allocating resources together, doing calls for research project time, you know, not for computing time, but for analyst time to help improve codes. And then we started writing documentation together. And then we wrote grants together to the provincial government. And in 2011, we created the first version of Calcul Quebec through that. Then time passed, and there was this event that many of you will remember of reducing the number of sites in the country that would be funded through Compute Canada. And at that time, in Quebec, the position that we took was that we didn't want to lose the expertise. Like we had 4 expert teams at the time, you know, each working in their own data center more or less independently. I mean, they were talking to each other, but they were not really collaborating. And so we decided to move forward with one proposal, but where the operations team would come from these 4 institutions. So we would just we would just use the expertise that was Andy in there and try to build a stronger team. And that's where we are right now. So we currently have one major site in operations, and we have, you know, some of the residual one. But the idea is to do it jointly rather than to compete against each other, right? And so that goes to the vision that Nizar was mentioning earlier of collaboration rather than competition. And right now, Calcul Quebec is even taking one step further, creating an incorporated entity where all Quebec institutions will be allowed to participate. All right. So this took time. It took us 12 years. I hope Andrea is not going to take 12 years. I think Enrio can build on the teams that are already there. But just to say that it's something that we have to build, and we should all do that together and trying to use what's best in each. Another key element in collaboration, I think, for Andrea is to maintain the researchers at the core of our priorities. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is to really involve researchers in development projects. Of course, they have a certain view of the world. They're the ones that define the needs. They shouldn't be the ones that define the solution. We should leave that to technical experts, right? But this dialogue should be at the core of how we work together. Now, in the future, there's lots of things that we need to work on, and they're all based on collaboration. So we need to work out on software and platforms. And there's a white paper on developing platforms for the future and making them available to researchers. Many researchers, they did not choose to become computer scientists, right? They're doing biology, or maybe they're working in the humanities, social sciences, etc. They don't want to know about, you know, deep down computing, but they need to be able to use the tools of advanced research computing. And the only way for them to do that is if we're able to provide them with platforms and environments that are adapted to these communities. All that is something that will require enormous collaboration. The challenge is huge to be able to serve everyone. And there's no way any one institution or even region is able to do it by itself. We need secure environments. So with some Quebec people, I was meeting with the OHDP, the Ontario Health Data Platform. I think it's 2 weeks ago. And so Quebec was wondering how to do the same thing locally, obviously, right? And what they were saying is like the starting point, it's a data policy. What's a data policy? That's the engagement that, on how we're going to work together, how we're going to share things, and how we will behave. That's the starting point. And there's no way you can establish that without talking, collaboration, and understanding each other's needs. Um, I think that as a national body, NDRIO should really put forward the open source software effort, uh, rather than buying expensive licenses to commercial providers. We can actually provide developers to work on the software and contribute to the greater community. Once again, collaborative effort, open, sharing, not even only on the national scale, but also being part of international projects. And that's also the way to get international recognition for the organization. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was data management. This is this is really fashionable these days to talk about this, but this is really at the core of the things we do. Like in art, people have not heard so much talked about data management, but really, we've got petabytes and petabytes of storage on our systems, and what's there, it's data. And if we want researchers to have an easy access to their data, if we want our systems to be more performant, more efficient, the only way to do that is through a positive vision of how we will manage that data in the future, and reshare it. But that's the long term. In the short term, this is also something we need to worry about. Um, so that's mostly what I wanted to say. And I'm really looking forward to doing all of that in collaboration with Andrea, and an organization with a new name that is easier to say and that carries more of a message.
Indeed. One of my dear board members, David Bernard, always said, "We got to think of a new name." So he's right beside you when we do that. So thank you, Suzanne, for those wonderful comments and very inspirational remarks. So we'll now begin the Q&A section of our agenda. As we promised, we've left lots of time for that. As a quick reminder, you can submit questions using the chat function. You're also welcome to share feedback or ask your question out loud by raising your hand by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of your screen and select the raised hand option. And once you've been selected, then please lower your hands. And my colleague Guylaine and others on my team and myself will be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Cynthia, I'll be relying on you to go through the chat and let me know if there are any particular questions.
Absolutely. In addition to questions, I know we certainly welcome comments or feedback as well. So if there's anything folks would like to share with us in that way, please feel free to share.
I should also note, as you're contemplating your questions, that we are welcoming any questions in both official languages. We have a specific session following this that will be conducted entirely in French, and so I suspect many of our principally first language French speaking individuals will there. But if there is someone who this time worked better for and would like to ask their question in French, we'll respond to you in French.
several REM.
Sorry, Andrew, were you saying something?
Nope, sorry, I'm in another meeting as well. I'll mute myself. I apologize.
That's okay.
I didn't realize I was not muted.
No worries. I'm not seeing anything in the chat or any other questions. Again, happy to also give 20, 30 minutes back to you in your respective calendars if many of you feel you'd rather ask. Oh,
There's a question.
okay. Can we look at ensuring all research is protected? I'm thinking of the closing of science libraries by the Harper government. Can we build in mechanisms to ensure no data is lost? That's a great question, Carmen. In fact, I'm not sure I'm the best person to even answer it. I might even call on some individuals who are closer to this than I am. I know, for example, a highly respected and dear colleague, Jeff Moon, is on the line. Guylaine could probably answer this one. We also have board members with background on this, Donna, for example. So I'll look to any of those who might want to take a shot at Carmen's answer.
I'll take a stab at it, Nizar.
Thank you, Jeff.
The role of libraries in maintaining the memory of Canadian research and Canadian culture in general is well known, and certainly when the Harper government came into play, libraries stepped up and did a lot of backing up of data and providing means of accessing this. And an example would be the Scholars Portal initiative out of the University of Toronto and supported by the Ontario Council of University Libraries, which has gathered up and stored in their platform a large number of government documents and other kinds of information that were otherwise at risk of being lost. Another example was when a certain president, who's now outgoing, came into power back in 2016. There was a data hackathon north of the border here in Canada to gather up data from websites and other sources in the United States that were thought to be at risk and in fact ended up being actually at risk and having their data deleted by the government of the United States. And those data were gathered up and organized as a consequence of that. So there is a history in the library community of certainly supporting the preservation of data, and the entire enterprise that Portage and Research Data Canada and now Endrio is undertaking is dedicated to ensuring that data are preserved and made fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable over time.
Thank you, Jeff. The next question is, will the RFP coming up in the next week or so for the Global Environmental Scan be open on the Endrio website? So just a point of clarification there, Karen. So the RFP that we're putting out is comprised of the 3 deliverables: the Global Environmental Scan, the funding model, and the emerging technologies component. And it's an invitational RFP that's going out, I think, by the end of the week to 5 of the largest firms in Canada. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is the scope of what's involved. We're also encouraging them as part of the RFP that if there are niche areas of knowledge and practice, that they would be encouraged and supported to associate with other firms that may have specific areas of expertise. But when we think about organizing the series of working groups that are going to be involved, managing the times, holding town halls in both official languages, and then releasing these things, we wanted a firm who had the overhead capacity to support what we're envisioning here. So that's the role of the National Service Delivery Model work that will be engaged in the coming months. I see JJ is asking a question. Is there any pushback or risk from federal funders as a result of the shift to the right of the plane? No. So thankfully, JJ, it's a great question. We've actually heard the opposite. We've heard support from federal ministers and federal ministries to say, the strategic pause or the shift in timelines is actually one we support. And if you're actually proposing through the inaugural call and other activities to do more consultation, then that's something that we support, and we will protect the funds that we were identifying as we go forward. So thank you for asking that question, but we're not in any jeopardy of losing the needed resources for this. I'll turn back to you, Cynthia, if you want to sort of, the questions are coming faster than I can handle.
I'm happy to do this for you, Nizar. So the next question reads, you mentioned that the users of Endrio infrastructure who don't want to worry about how the hardware works. How do you balance their needs with those of folks who do care about how the hardware works and want to wring every last cycle out of every CPU?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, probably beyond my sort of level of expertise. I might even turn and notice the sort of efforts that we're saying, by virtue of what I'm doing. When we don't know the answer, we go to the community that does know the answer, and as opposed to hoping you don't think we're sidestepping it. But I would look to Suzanne, I would look to Chris Loken, who's on the line, and others who have been managing these environments for a number of years to help answer Pauline's question.
Yeah, I can take a stab, and maybe Chris, you can complete what I say. I will just it's wonderful to work with researchers who really know computer science and computing, etc. And so there definitely needs to be a place for both in what can I say more than that? That has to be part of the planning process. When we try to understand what are the needs of the community, I was talking about platforms for those researchers who don't know about computer science and don't want to know about computer science. They still need to be able to use it, and to use it in a meaningful way. I'm not a big fan of the black box. You still need to understand the principles of what's inside the box, right? Without being able to know each every little detail. But obviously, if the research the research community that does know how these things work, we can definitely provide them full access to the system, or maybe not full access. I don't think Chris is gonna like that if I say so, but reasonable access to be able to get all the power that they can get out of the cycles of the machines, of the infrastructure.
Thank you.
Chris, anything you want to supplement on that? Or did Suzanne capture it? All right. The next one, Cynthia, if I'm reading Ashok, is saying, what is the expected growth potential and the skills gap in this sector? This information will be helpful in career guidance for young professionals. I couldn't agree more, Ashok. In fact, the skill gap is quite broad, but Canada is actually doing better than many other countries. And again, if anyone wants to sort of complement my response with additional information. But one of the things that we've actually learned at the high level, so I can answer the 50,000 foot level, cybersecurity training is going to be absolutely paramount. As the granting councils are asking for research data management plans, knowledge in that sector is going to be paramount. Knowledge in terms of understanding how the variety of different mechanisms that cloud could potentially work. So cloud engineering, cloud computing, I think will be enormously helpful. But what we're hearing overwhelmingly is that many of the global behemoths are looking at Canada as a magnet for highly qualified personnel. Routinely, I'll get calls to say that, we would love to support internships or other things where we look to the academic and other environments to grow this talent and then have them mature into industry in many ways. So one of the things that I've been starting to think about is how do we better align with the community colleges and the universities in creating streams around training for these individuals. Vector Institute, for instance, and many others have started, master's programs in data analytics and other activities to help fulfill these potential gaps in particular provinces. But I know the same is happening in Quebec and in British Columbia as well, and probably in other provinces that I just may not have on my radar screen. But a number of skills are emerging in this area, or gaps are emerging, Ashok, where I think working with the training environments and saying that, you know, these are the forecasted gaps that we have would be enormously helpful. Ben is asking, Ben, very happy with the white paper that COPL, OCUL, BCI, and CAUL submitted yesterday, outlining the role of the library consortia in DRI. Indeed, Ben. I'll acknowledge fully, of all of the hundreds of papers that submitted, I've only made my way about 1/10 of the way there, but I do have hopes to actually review all of them. And I, again, want to sincerely thank all of you for taking the time and energy to do so. It's to me a testament and an illustration of the level of commitment all of you had. We put out a call for white paper and got over 100 at a time that I know all of you are dealing with COVID in your academic environments and other challenges, yet you still found the time to do so. You know, I apologize for having to put more work on your plate, which has never been my goal. But on the other hand, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and sincerely on behalf of our organization and on behalf of our board and on behalf of the community for taking the time to do so. Other questions, whether in chat or somebody wants to ask it verbally?
So Nizar, just a point, Felipe sent me a note to remind people or let people know that more white papers are indeed, they're still coming in, and we are uploading them in batches. So know that more will be posted soon.
Terrific. Thanks, Cynthia. And from Malcolm, excellent presentation, super informative and helpful meeting. The future looks bright. Thank you, my friend. Florent, how do we see the collaboration between Endrio, Canary, integrated DRI, including networking? As an example, in the future inaugural call, ideas may have an important networking requirement that would require Canary and NREN participation. Wonderful question, Florent. I have the sincere pleasure of being able to share, and I don't think I've made this a secret, that Jim Gadbain and I work hand in glove. Our two organizations not only share some board members, but we have committed to meet on a tri-weekly, every 3 weeks basis, where we share activities. I've been invited to Canary board meetings. Jim's been invited to ours. So you can expect that a representative, whether it's Jim himself or Mark from his team or others, to participate on all of those evaluations, both for the inaugural call as well as for the national service delivery model. And I don't have the full list of participants in front of me, but if someone from the Canary senior team wishes to add, it's been a very collaborative, positive working relationship. And just at our December 8th board meeting, both Jim and his chair, Eddie Campbell, and our chair and vice chair, Janet Davis and Peter McKinnon, exchanged their commitment to each organization to working collaboratively and going forward. So you'll expect, like Jim and I have always said, what's the point of a bunch of boxes if you can't share data across a network that enables them, and vice versa? What's the point of a network if you don't have the machinery to support the kind of analytics and research that's happening? So we're trying very hard to continue to collaborate and work positively together. You're most welcome, sir. Any other questions? All right, let me try then and give back 15 minutes to people's calendars, but we'll end with a poll that Madeline's going to pop up in a moment, which will ask you around how often would you like Endrio to host member update meetings? Would you like them monthly, every 2 months, quarterly, or not necessarily by a defined schedule, only when there's necessarily news to share? So on your screens, you should see the poll just immediately appear. And when you click one of the options that best suits you, we'll tabulate them and take them forward as part of our planning activities. So go ahead and vote as you deem appropriate. Because we'll do a lifetime share of the results. Madeline, you'll let us know once votes have come in, and you'll, I believe, present them on the screen for us to look at as we then wind down the meeting. All right, so there seems to be at least 2/5 of you, or at least 60%, looking for quarterly meetings. No one wants to hear from me monthly, thank goodness. And every 2 months comes in second. So we're probably looking at quarterly update opportunities. I wholeheartedly support that. That will make life easier for us and less of my ugly mug on your screens. So allow me then to take this opportunity to once again sincerely thank all of you, to wish you well over the coming holidays, to ask for a collective prayer that the vaccine is effective and can be disseminated so that we will have the opportunity to see one another in person, perhaps and hopefully in Ottawa, as we embark on our strategic planning efforts that our board is diligently and anxiously awaiting the opportunity to lead us through. And more importantly, be safe, be healthy, and I look forward to working collaboratively with every one of you in the coming months as we embark on our national service delivery model and other activities. And look for the postings from Odgers Bernston that should be coming out, as well as on our own website for the various positions. Nothing would make me happier than to have some of you as part of the team. And please encourage your colleagues, if not yourself, to put forward their expressions of interest to join the organization. Thank you, everyone, and God bless.